The house glittered under the soft glow of Christmas lights, the kind that made every surface shimmer as if dusted with gold. I stood near the grand staircase, glass of sparkling cider in hand, taking in the familiar chaos of a family gathering. Laughter rang from the dining room, soft yet brittle, a harmony polished to hide cracks. Houston's winter air was crisp outside, but inside, warmth mixed with subtle tension. The scent of pine, roasted turkey, and ambition. I adjusted the cuff of my sleeve, noting the way my father-in-law politely ignored me as he circled the room with his usual charm. My mother watched from her seat by the fireplace, a faint frown betraying her habitual distance. They had always been slightly out of reach emotionally, even when I had devoted myself to keeping the family together. At 45, I had built my career carefully, winning cases, negotiating contracts, navigating politics of law offices. Composure was my armor, intelligence my shield. I was observant. Details often invisible to others leaped at me. My sister-in-law lingered near the buffet, smiling too brightly, eyes darting around as if seeking something beyond the holiday display. Polite cousins whispered over the rims of wine glasses, and I caught the flicker of envy, subtle yet unmistakable, in the corner of her eye. It was Christmas Eve, yet my mind churned with old patterns, being overlooked, undervalued, quietly doing what no one else bothered to notice. I moved toward the dessert table, pretending interest in the pecan pie while my attention lingered elsewhere. That's when I noticed it, an envelope peeking from under a napkin, a small, innocent detail, yet it carried the weight of my hidden fortune. $35 million quietly set aside, the fruit of years of careful planning and cautious investments. My sister-in-law's fingers brushed the edge, curiosity flickering across her face. She didn't notice me watching. I felt a flicker of anxiety, a mild tightening in my chest as I calculated the chain reaction this discovery could trigger. Who else might have noticed? How far would this ripple extend before I could intervene? As the evening progressed, I watched her behavior subtly shift. Casual comments about success and responsibility, the way she lingered in conversations near me, almost as if fishing for information. Other family members continued their mingling, oblivious, polite, and I thought about the countless times I had been overlooked despite my contributions. A misplaced ornament, a napkin folded oddly, tiny markers of attention I hadn't consciously noticed before, now seemed loaded with silent messages. The room's festive glow contrasted sharply with the tightening knot of strategy forming in my mind. Should I confront her directly, demand discretion, or play the long game? Humiliation, manipulation, and opportunism were all possibilities. Patience had always been my advantage. I reminded myself that keeping calm allowed control, rehearsing potential responses silently, evaluating tone, posture, timing. I was not naive. I understood the stakes and I trusted my judgment. Later, she leaned slightly closer, a casual remark slipping from her lips. I hear some people are more generous than others around here. Her voice was light, teasing, but my mind caught the weight behind it. Eyes flicked toward mine briefly, a test. I remained composed, replying with measured smiles and polite nods, observing how the rest of the family reacted. Subtle shifts, hints of curiosity, a faint glimmer of opportunism, each a signal I catalogued internally. I noticed then the small Christmas ornament on the mantel, a delicate glass star, slightly askew. It would seem meaningless to anyone else, yet to me it became an echo, a memory anchor, a reminder of the balance I intended to maintain. Moments like this shaped decisions, quietly guiding how and when I would act. My fortune was no longer invisible. Someone knew. The implications were immediate, unavoidable, and thrillingly dangerous. By the time dessert was served and the last carols hummed softly through the speakers, I recognized the shift. The air between us had changed. I felt the subtle tension, the unspoken question, hanging between her gaze and mine. My pulse remained steady, my voice calm, but the mind worked tirelessly, calculating, predicting, anticipating. I would not be cornered, I would not be outmaneuvered. Knowledge was power, and I had plenty. The evening continued in polite laughter and gentle exchanges, but beneath it a current surged, signaling that the real Christmas Eve had just begun, and the real revelations were yet to come. The evening had grown quieter, the earlier laughter fading into low murmurs as the family settled into smaller conversations. The soft hum of Christmas music filled the spaces between words, yet each note seemed to underline an unspoken tension. I lingered near the fireplace, my fingers tracing the rim of my glass, aware of every glance and subtle shift around me. My sister-in-law's eyes had changed since discovering the envelope. Curiosity mixed with something more, expectation, perhaps even calculation. I had seen that look before in boardrooms and courtrooms, but this time it was pointed at me and at my private fortune. I noticed a cousin leaning slightly closer in a conversation, dropping a comment about someone's recent financial decisions. The words were casual, almost careless, but there was an unmistakable edge. My mind catalogued each inflection, the way her hands tightened around her wine glass, the quick glance at other family members as if gauging reactions. These subtle shifts had meaning, and I understood them instantly. My pulse remained steady, my smile composed, yet internally I mapped the possible ramifications, each scenario meticulously. Who would exploit this knowledge? Who might be swayed or persuaded to align with her curiosity? Throughout the evening, my attention remained sharp, cataloguing micro-expressions and minor gestures. A folded holiday card, the centerpiece slightly askew, a napkin tucked oddly on a plate. All minor, but in my mind they became signposts of observation. I had long relied on subtle details to anticipate moves, to plan and protect, and tonight was no exception. The room felt like a chessboard, each family member a piece whose intentions I could read, but whose moves I needed to predict. My sister-in-law approached, leaning casually against the doorway, her words light, teasing, yet brimming with implication. I guess some people have all the luck, don't they? A faint murmur rippled among those nearest her, curiosity dancing in their eyes. I responded with a calm nod, letting the conversation flow while mentally dissecting each pause and inflection. I was not about to reveal anything, not tonight. Patience was my tool and composure my shield. I reflected on past patterns, how I had often been undervalued, overlooked despite efforts, contributions, and sacrifices. But I had learned to read situations, to let others reveal themselves while I maintained quiet authority. The knowledge that my fortune was now in the room's collective awareness changed the stakes. It was no longer hypothetical. It was tangible. Anticipation mingled with caution. Each interaction carried a weight that demanded attention, yet I moved through the space with the same measured grace I had cultivated over decades. By the time dessert was cleared and the family began to drift toward couches and quiet corners, I felt the subtle shift in energy. Conversations held a lighter tension now, smiles edged with curiosity, compliments tinged with unspoken agendas. I positioned myself strategically, observing, noting, and remaining aware that each movement, each word, could carry consequences. My mind raced quietly, rehearsing approaches for when the moment arrived to assert boundaries, to gauge loyalty, to test intentions. The night carried on, and the shadow of suspicion had firmly settled. I could sense that the knowledge of my fortune had seeped beyond the casual discovery, quietly expanding in reach. The glances, the pauses, the whispered comments, all painted a pattern I could decipher with precision. I would not act rashly, yet I could feel the anticipation building, a tension ready to snap at any misstep. I had to stay vigilant, to navigate this delicate terrain with strategy and resolve. My composure was my strongest defense, my intelligence my guiding light. The evening closed around us, each family member unknowingly playing into the larger picture, and I remained quietly in command, anticipating what would unfold next. The air in the Houston home had shifted subtly as the evening progressed. The warmth of Christmas lights and the scent of pine barely masked the growing undercurrent of tension. I moved quietly through the living room, noting the way my family lingered in small groups, their conversations punctuated by glances in my direction. The folded napkin from earlier still rested on the table, a small, silent reminder of the previous chapter's unease. Each detail seemed loaded with significance, each smile or sideways glance a coded message I had to decipher. The knowledge of my fortune, once hidden, was now a shadow stretching over every interaction, subtle but undeniable. A distant cousin approached, a practiced smile on her face, and remarked about financial decisions in a tone just casual enough to disguise curiosity, but sharp enough to pierce through polite conversation. I observed her body language, the way she shifted her weight, the micro expression flickering across her eyes, and noted every subtlety. Who supported her, who sought advantage, who was indifferent. Every nuance mattered. I had learned that in these family gatherings, the smallest gestures often spoke volumes. Then my sister-in-law entered the room, her presence deliberate, every movement calculated. She leaned slightly closer as if drawn to test boundaries, her voice light yet carrying the weight of expectation. "I suppose sharing a little insight wouldn't hurt, would it?" she said, a teasing tone overlaying a sharp edge. The others around her subtly stiffened, curiosity mingling with quiet anticipation. I maintained my composure, smiling politely, letting the remark pass without acknowledgement while cataloguing every reaction for future consideration. Patience had always been my ally, and tonight it was indispensable. My internal monologue churned with scenarios, each more intricate than the last. I replayed past instances when I had been overlooked or undervalued, remembering the steady calm that had allowed me to navigate those moments with dignity. Now, faced with a potential challenge to my control, I relied on the same principles: observe, anticipate, and respond with strategy rather than impulse. Each family member became a variable in a delicate equation, every word and gesture contributing to a pattern I intended to understand before acting. As the evening wore on, the subtle pressures intensified. Conversations shifted around me, a cousin commenting on gift choices with a pointed emphasis, an aunt offering backhanded praise while glancing in my direction. The interplay of social signals was complex, a delicate dance of insinuation and subtle manipulation. I maneuvered through it with the practiced grace of someone who understood the stakes. My awareness of potential public humiliation or pressure to reveal my fortune sharpened my focus rather than weakened it. Even the smallest objects took on new significance: a misaddressed gift on the mantel, a name tag slightly askew, a holiday ornament slightly out of place. All became markers of tension, symbols of family dynamics in motion. Each cue was catalogued, analyzed, and stored for strategic use when the moment arrived. I felt the weight of anticipation mounting, sensing that the delicate balance of observation and control would soon be tested. By the time the night deepened, I was acutely aware of the undercurrent spreading through the room. The knowledge of my fortune had begun to ripple outward, reaching beyond my sister-in-law to others who, consciously or unconsciously, were gauging their approach, their comments and their postures accordingly. I remained poised, a quiet force in the room, calculating, patient, ready to assert boundaries or redirect attention at precisely the right moment. The tension was palpable, yet my control over it remained absolute, my intelligence guiding each silent assessment, each measured response. The shadows of suspicion had fully taken hold. I could feel the pressure building, a slow crescendo of expectation and subtle challenge. My mind raced quietly, rehearsing possible responses, anticipating manipulation, and planning for every contingency. Every interaction, every glance, every half spoken remark carried significance, and I was ready. The evening closed around us with the hush of subdued curiosity, a quiet but growing storm, and I remained steadfast, aware that the next move, mine or theirs, would change the dynamics of the family forever. The living room had grown quieter, the usual hum of holiday chatter replaced by subtle tension that seemed to linger in the air. I noticed the slight shift in the seating arrangement. My sister-in-law, now closer to my parents, her posture casual yet deliberate, her smile masking a sharpened awareness. The gift exchange had begun, and I could feel the undercurrent of curiosity as glances darted toward me whenever I reached for a wrapped package or commented politely on someone else's choice. Even the ornaments seemed to lean in with significance, casting shadows that mirrored the shifting dynamics around me. I took a slow breath, anchoring myself with the calm that had carried me through countless tense situations before. Patience, I reminded myself, was not passive, it was strategic. Her comment came like a spark in a dry room. I suppose handling so much money must come with interesting challenges, she said, eyes flicking subtly toward the gift I had just placed on the table. There was a measured tone beneath the words, implying judgment, entitlement, and a test of boundaries all at once. I smiled lightly, maintaining composure, letting the remark hang in the air without acknowledgement. My mind catalogued the reactions of others, the faint nod of a distant cousin, a glance exchanged between my parents, a subtle tightening of an aunt's lips. Each micro-reaction was a clue, a piece of the family's complex puzzle I intended to decode. The tension escalated as a distant cousin stepped forward, questioning my role in the family legacy with a pointed but polite inquiry. "I've always wondered how you manage to balance everything and still keep so many of us on track," he said, voice light but edged with insinuation. I felt the pull of anxiety. This was no longer subtle curiosity. It was a probe, a challenge to my credibility and authority within the family. I weighed my options silently. Respond directly, risk confrontation, or maintain strategic silence to preserve control. My years of experience had taught me that composure often carried more weight than words, especially in a room full of observers, ready to measure every reaction. While navigating these interactions, I observed every minor gesture. The aunt who rearranged the silverware slightly, a cousin who adjusted a chair with care, a folded napkin that seemed to mark territory, each a subtle indicator of alliances, hierarchy, and unspoken expectations. I engaged in polite conversation, complimented a carefully chosen gift, offered a smile, all the while mentally mapping the web of intentions surrounding me. It was a dance of diplomacy, one that required alertness and precision, the kind that I had mastered over years of balancing family, career, and personal integrity. Internally, I reflected on patterns I had recognized since the previous chapter. The sister-in-law's veiled challenge, the cousin's indirect questioning, the micro-expressions of silent observers, they were all part of a game I had been anticipating, though the timing was faster than I had expected. My guiding principle remained clear. Patience coupled with awareness provided control. My emotions were tightly tethered, allowing observation to guide my strategy rather than impulsive reaction. Each exchange, each glance, reinforced the growing awareness that the evening's events were leading toward an inevitable confrontation. As the clock edged closer to late evening, the pressure became palpable. Whispers floated across the room, the sound of laughter slightly too sharp. A toast offered with a lingering pause, each subtle shift signaling that the curiosity and expectation regarding my fortune were no longer contained. I noted these cues, steadying my posture, letting outward calm mask the strategic calculations whirling inside my mind. The night was far from over, and the moves I made in these moments would define the boundaries of respect and authority in the chapters to come. I felt the rising confrontation pressing close, and I was ready, not brashly, but with measured anticipation, prepared to navigate the storm with intelligence, poise, and deliberate patience. The night had grown colder, and the warmth from the fireplace could not mask the shifting currents among the family. I watched quietly as the subtle maneuvers of my relatives began to take shape. Glances lingered too long, smiles carried an edge, and whispered comments brushed against the edges of my awareness. I felt the weight of every eye in the room, assessing, measuring, and guessing at what I might do next. Each movement, each laugh, each clink of glass seemed to carry more meaning than the last. The pressure was mounting, and I could feel the subtle tightening of the social web around me. I reminded myself that patience was not weakness. It was the strategy I needed to maintain control. It started with a veiled remark from an older cousin. "You've certainly done well for yourself," he said, the words casual, the tone deliberate. I caught the micro-expression, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps envy, underneath his polite exterior. I did not respond, allowing the statement to hang in the room like an unspoken challenge. My eyes swept across the faces around me, noting who seemed genuinely interested, who masked opportunism, and who maintained neutral distance. Each small detail mattered, and I catalogued them mentally, careful not to reveal even the faintest sign of agitation. Then my sister-in-law leaned in with a comment so casual it could have been dismissed, yet it carried unmistakable weight. "I suppose some of us would love to know how you manage all of this," she said, almost as if sharing a light-hearted observation, but the glance accompanying it left no doubt. I felt the familiar sting of being cornered, but I reminded myself that control lay in composure. My mind ran through potential responses, each weighed for risk and outcome. The room seemed to shrink around me as the unspoken expectations crystallized into tangible pressure. I felt the subtle pull of family hierarchy, the delicate balance of respect and challenge, and the ever-present threat of misstep. The tension escalated further when a distant relative, previously silent, asked about my involvement in a family decision, a seemingly innocent question layered with scrutiny. I noted the gestures of others, a tilt of the head, a raised eyebrow, a whispered exchange between cousins. Each told a story of allegiance, curiosity, or subtle antagonism. My internal monologue raced, calculating potential consequences and rehearsing measured responses that would assert authority without giving fuel to public speculation. I observed, listened, and remained outwardly calm, each smile and nod carefully calibrated. Amid the rising conflict, symbolic cues anchored my perception. A misaligned ornament, a gift tag misplaced, a napkin folded unusually, each minor detail reinforcing the social hierarchy and alerting me to shifts in dynamics. I recognized the significance of these small gestures not as trivialities, but as markers of influence, attention, and subtle control. I used them to gauge who might offer support, who would watch silently, and who might actively undermine me if provoked. My strategic patience became a shield, allowing me to maintain composure while assessing the stakes of every interaction. As the evening deepened, the atmosphere thickened with expectation. Voices lowered, movements slowed, and the subtle chessboard of family dynamics became more apparent. I could sense the limits of patience stretching, as if the room itself held its breath for the moment when I would speak or be forced to react. Each conversation, each small gesture layered upon the last, and I knew the escalation was not over. The veiled challenges and subtle provocations had set the stage for decisive action. I felt the intensity in my chest, a mix of resolve, alertness, and anticipation, knowing that the night was only halfway through and that every choice I made now could shape the balance of power for years to come. The air in the room was thick with tension, each flicker of candlelight revealing subtle movements and careful postures. I scanned the gathering, noting who whispered to whom, who lingered too long over a glance, and who watched with an unreadable expression. Every detail mattered. I reminded myself that control was as much about observation as it was about action. The stakes were clear: reputation, family perception, and the delicate control over what was known and what remained private. The room, beautifully decorated for Christmas, seemed almost to conspire with me. A misaligned napkin, a misplaced ornament, even the placement of gifts spoke of hierarchy, attention, and hidden agendas. I adjusted my posture, took a quiet breath, and prepared to assert myself without losing composure. A familiar voice cut through the low hum of conversation, deliberate in its casualness. "It's impressive how much you've done for the family," my cousin remarked, a slight tilt to his head suggesting more than mere politeness. I felt the edge of challenge beneath the words, a test wrapped in civility. My mind raced through possible responses: to respond immediately, to let it slide, or to gather more evidence. I chose restraint, letting the comment hang, measuring the reactions around me. A faint exchange of glances among other family members confirmed my suspicion. They were gauging me, testing the limits of my patience and control. Each subtle movement of their hands, the twitch of a lip, the narrowing of an eye added to the complexity of the moment. Then came a shift more direct, yet cloaked in casual phrasing. My sister-in-law leaned forward, her tone light but her meaning unmistakable. "I guess some of us are curious how you manage it all," she said, and I could see the calculation behind her eyes. I caught myself holding my breath, noting the positions of others who might support me, who might exploit a misstep. Internal frustration rose, tempered by the knowledge that measured calm was my strongest weapon. Every thought and observation was catalogued: the subtle snub of an overlooked gift, the misaddressed card, the quiet rearrangement of chairs, it all spoke volumes. I reminded myself that these cues were part of the unspoken rules of our family, and understanding them was my leverage. The evening accelerated. Another relative, quietly observant until now, posed a question about my role in recent family decisions, a gentle prod that carried hidden judgment. I noted the reactions, the way some leaned in, the subtle exchange of eyebrows, the poised smiles masking intent. It was clear the room had become a chessboard, each member positioning themselves, consciously or not, for advantage. I felt the familiar tension in my chest, alert, calculated, ready, but I also felt the thrill of recognition. I could see the patterns forming, and I knew how to navigate them. Control required patience and precision, not reaction. I withdrew briefly to gather my thoughts, reviewing the interactions, assessing potential allies, and cataloging the subtle signs of opposition. The history of being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated fueled my resolve. I could feel the power of quiet authority, the strength that came from understanding both the overt and hidden currents of this family. Each whispered conversation, every veiled remark, became a data point in a plan I was mentally assembling. I would respond, but on my terms, in my own time, ensuring every action reinforced both respect and awareness. The crescendo of tension was almost palpable as I prepared for what was to come. The evening's subtle provocations, layered with micro-expressions and indirect challenges, had set the stage. And I could sense the critical moment approaching when a decision or statement on my part could shift the balance completely. The room seemed to tighten around me, the warmth of the fireplace now a backdrop to a strategic battle of patience, intelligence, and composure. I knew that speaking now or waiting too long would define not just this night, but the perception of me for years to come. Every glance and gesture reinforced the stakes. Every pause offered opportunity or risk, and so I waited, poised yet watchful, aware that the time to assert myself would come. I understood the subtle dynamics, the pressures, and the potential consequences, but I also knew the strength of measured action. The moment was approaching, and I was ready to meet it head on with intelligence, grace, and unshakable calm. The room was alive with expectation, every whispered comment and furtive glance a challenge, and I at the center, prepared to turn the tide on my own terms. I kept my gaze steady, scanning the room as the clock edged closer to 11. Every glance, every subtle movement carried weight. I noticed who leaned toward whom, who lingered just a fraction too long when someone spoke, who remained perfectly neutral. Each tiny gesture told a story of alliances forming, loyalties being tested, and intentions being weighed. I recalled the small slights, the overlooked contributions, the gestures that had once seemed inconsequential. Now, they formed a map of the social terrain, a blueprint for the strategy I had been quietly constructing all evening. My exterior remained calm, composed, as if I were just another guest enjoying a holiday gathering, but inside my mind calculated every possibility, rehearsing responses to potential provocations while keeping my emotions carefully contained. The moment for subtle assertion arrived almost imperceptibly. A comment about a past project, lightly brushed into conversation, offered an opening. I seized it without appearing to, redirecting the focus to highlight accomplishments that had long gone unacknowledged. I mentioned specific instances, quietly but pointedly, of work that had directly benefited the family, phrasing each contribution in a matter-of-fact tone that left no room for debate. Eyes widened, smiles faltered, and whispered murmurs shifted direction. The satisfaction of recognition mingled with careful anticipation, knowing that each revelation was a calculated risk. I could feel the subtle ripple of acknowledgement moving through the room, a quiet confirmation that my authority, though understated, was being recognized. The tension did not fade, it evolved. A folder, casually set on the side table, caught my attention. Inside were documents and photographs, reminders of past decisions and contributions that had gone unseen. I introduced them to the conversation with measured timing, a gentle display of leverage, shifting the balance without confrontation. Reactions ranged from surprise to defensiveness, small undercurrents of conflict flaring among family members who suddenly realized they had underestimated me. My internal monologue remained deliberate, noting reactions, cataloging patterns, and confirming that patience and restraint had multiplied my influence. The ornaments, the misaligned cards, the overlooked gifts all became silent accomplices to my emerging authority. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. Years of being undervalued had honed a resilience I now wielded with precision. I felt a steadying pride in my intelligence and self-possession. The power in this quiet assertion was not in loud declarations or visible triumphs, but in controlled recognition, in influencing perceptions without overt aggression. The room had shifted subtly. The energy of expectation and acknowledgement had pivoted toward me. Each small interaction, each glance exchanged, reinforced my emerging position. I understood the delicate balance between patience and decisive action, and I was ready to tilt that balance further when necessary. As the minutes passed, I observed reactions with increasing acuity. Whispers turned into careful questions. Side glances hinted at recalibrated expectations, and even those who had remained neutral now began to evaluate their positions. I noted who could be influenced, who resisted, who might betray or challenge later. Every movement was a message, every pause a signal. I responded internally, adjusting my approach, modulating the tone of conversation, and maintaining the precise level of attention required to project confidence without provoking overt conflict. The room became a subtle arena where intelligence, patience, and strategic awareness mattered more than force or volume. By the time the hour approached, it was evident that the dynamics had shifted in ways that favored quiet power over impulsive reaction. I had asserted authority without confrontation, leveraged overlooked evidence and accomplishments, and subtly reminded the room that I was neither to be underestimated nor ignored. The anticipation for what was to come hung in the air. The next chapter would demand more direct engagement, but for now I had established a foothold. The quiet power I had cultivated was palpable, and every eye in the room, whether openly or surreptitiously, acknowledged it. I remained composed, aware that the culmination of the evening's tensions and strategies was approaching, and I was ready to meet it on my terms. The room felt taut, like a held breath waiting to be released. Dim lights cast long shadows across the polished hardwood, the holiday ornaments glinting silently as if conspiring with me. Everyone's attention was subtly attuned, not entirely conscious of it, yet fully aware that something had shifted. I knew the moment had come to act decisively. Years of patient observation, cataloguing interactions, noting alliances and subtle betrayals, all of it led to this precise instance. My mind traced every pattern, every slight, every overlooked contribution that had quietly accumulated significance. I took a slow breath, allowing the weight of the evening to settle into a calm readiness, mentally preparing for the revelation I had been cultivating. I presented the evidence quietly, deliberately. Folders with documents, photographs, and correspondence that quietly demonstrated my contributions to the family enterprise and decisions that had long been credited to others. Eyes widened. Some tried to redirect attention with polite laughter or casual commentary, but their attempts fell flat against the clarity of the evidence. I maintained composure, my voice steady and neutral, letting the facts speak without embellishment. Satisfaction mingled with a tempered anticipation, watching the ripple of surprise and acknowledgement spread across the room. For the first time that evening, the power dynamic tilted unmistakably in my favor, and I held it without aggression, only quiet authority. The stakes intensified as subtle challenges emerged. A cousin attempting to diminish the significance of my contributions questioned decisions I had executed flawlessly in the past. I countered calmly, citing dates, outcomes, and concrete results. Micro expressions betrayed hidden tension, smiles faltered, whispers stilled, and even those who had remained neutral now reconsidered their stance. The room's energy shifted, the quiet moral reckoning in my actions evident to all. Objects around us, folded cards, ornaments, misplaced napkins, seemed charged with the unspoken hierarchy, reinforcing the tangible weight of my strategic intervention. I stayed measured, knowing that overreaction could unravel the careful authority I had built, while underreaction risked losing control. The final maneuver was subtle yet decisive. I introduced one last piece of evidence, a small, overlooked detail that tied together multiple threads. Decisions, contributions, and moments of guidance I had provided that shaped outcomes silently but irreversibly. The impact was immediate. Conversations halted mid-sentence, surprised glances met hesitant acknowledgement, and unspoken hierarchy realigned visibly. The room's dynamic transformed, the silent acceptance of my authority cemented without a single raised voice. Triumph was layered with restraint. I had asserted dominance not through confrontation, but through calculated precision, intelligence, and moral clarity. The air hummed with the realization that control had shifted, and it was recognized. I paused for a moment of internal reflection. The night had been a testament to patience, strategy, and self-possession. I felt the quiet satisfaction of earned recognition, the deep validation of intellect and restraint. Family relationships would need recalibration. Some might repair, others might distance, but the precedent was clear. Symbolic gestures, hands paused over gifts, careful glances at documents, the subtle rearrangement of seating served as visual confirmation of justice, achieved and boundaries reinforced. I allowed myself a brief acknowledgement of relief, tempered by awareness that true equilibrium would require continued vigilance. The story of this night had changed, yet it was far from over, the final chapter looming with its own lessons and resolutions. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, softening the edges of the long night. The house was quieter now, a calm after the storm of whispered accusations and strategic revelations. Family members moved cautiously, still processing the events of the previous evening, the tension in their shoulders lingering like a shadow. I observed them with a quiet sense of relief, noting subtle signs of acknowledgement, an unspoken nod, a careful glance, a return of misattributed credit. The holiday decorations, slightly askew, seemed almost symbolic of the upheaval we had just navigated, a visual echo of lessons learned and respect finally earned. I reflected inwardly, appreciating the balance I had maintained, assertive without aggression, firm without resentment, and resolute without haste. This was a moment of personal growth, of measured triumph that no one could diminish. I revealed the final piece of hidden evidence, the document that tied together my contributions and clarified previously disputed claims. The reactions were immediate and revealing: surprise, hesitance, some remorse, and undeniable acknowledgement. A few family members offered quiet apologies, while others adjusted their demeanor, visibly reconciling with the truth I had quietly laid before them. I maintained calm authority, allowing the evidence to speak on its own while exercising empathy and fairness. The atmosphere shifted, the balance restored, respect re-established, and dignity recognized. This resolution was not only about what was rightfully mine, but also about clarifying the narrative of my contributions, setting a moral precedent without unnecessary conflict or vindictiveness. Subtle gestures, a returned gift, a corrected acknowledgement, a hesitant smile signaled closure and understanding. As I moved through the rooms, the possibility of mending relationships came into focus. Not all wounds would heal and some distance would remain, but awareness of my own worth and capabilities offered strength. I considered the lessons of resilience, strategic thinking, and emotional intelligence, understanding that my independence and clarity were my true victories. Moments of reconciliation, even small, reinforced the potential for genuine connections built on respect rather than assumption. The quiet empowerment I carried allowed me to navigate both distance and proximity with grace, acknowledging the past but refusing to be defined solely by it. Each interaction now held the possibility of choice rather than obligation or deference. Returning to the familiar echo-emotional anchor, from the beginning of this journey, a small ornament once overlooked, I found deeper significance in its presence. It now symbolized awareness, recognition, and the enduring value of quiet perseverance. Observing the subtle victories and remaining challenges, I sensed a blend of hope and realism, understanding that life would continue to present trials, yet I now possessed the tools and clarity to meet them on my terms. This anchor, once trivial, had become a testament to resilience, judgment, and measured authority, echoing the strategic patience that had guided the entire series of confrontations. As the morning unfolded, I allowed myself to contemplate forward momentum. The past had tested me, shaping strategies, patience, and self-awareness, but the future lay unwritten, defined now by my choices and actions. Family dynamics had shifted, recognition was secured, and my own sense of self had strengthened. I carried with me the quiet assurance that justice, once claimed, could coexist with empathy and intelligence. The narrative of the night, now concluded, left room for reflection, for measured trust, and for continued assertion of boundaries that honoured both my intellect and my dignity. The story of Christmas Eve had reached resolution, yet its lessons promised enduring guidance. As the morning light filled the room, I knew that while the past had shaped me, the future was finally mine to define.